Inside a dim tailor shop, an SS officer admires a stolen jacket, unaware that the shadow behind him holds a heavy hatchet. A sudden wet crack echoes through the room as the first of 11 high-ranking Nazis falls silently into a pile of clothes. In exactly 60 minutes, 600 starving prisoners will attempt to decapitate the entire command of the world's most efficient killing machine. They have no outside help and no heavy weapons, only a timetable written from memory and a desperate hunger for final justice. This is the true story of the Sobibor Uprising, a high-stakes gamble where a single mistake meant certain death for every inmate. Sobibor was not a prison but a factory engineered for one purpose: murdering human beings at a terrifying and industrial speed. Hidden in a remote Polish forest, the camp was surrounded by minefields and electrified fences that swallowed any hope of a survival. The operation ran with mechanical efficiency, using a fake railway station and a frozen clock to deceive thousands of unsuspecting Jewish families. Within 3 hours of arrival, most were inert, neutralized by exhaust fumes while their belongings were sorted for shipment back to Germany. The only prisoners kept alive were the Sonderkommando, a slave workforce forced to operate the machinery of death until their own expiration. Every worker knew they were living on borrowed time, as the Nazis routinely executed witnesses to maintain the secrecy of their crimes. Escape seemed impossible due to the 3 concentric fences and the Ukrainian guards who manned the towers with heavy machine gun nests. Previous attempts had ended in mass executions, leaving bodies displayed in the yard as a gruesome warning to anyone who dared dream. By autumn 1943, rumors spread that the Nazis were liquidating the camps to destroy evidence before the advancing Red Army could arrive. Doing nothing was now deadlier than an uprising, as the prisoners realized they were the final witnesses scheduled for a total neutralization. On September 23rd, a transport brought Alexander Pechersky, a Soviet officer with a strategist's mind and a refusal to die a passive death. He met Leon Feldhendler, a Polish resistance leader who had the contacts but lacked the military training to execute a successful camp breakout. That night, in the shadows of the barracks, they forged an alliance between the dreamer and the soldier to plan history's largest revolt. Sasha realized the SS officers had grown fat and careless, treating the extermination camp like a private resort fueled by stolen luxury. The Nazis wandered the grounds unarmed, trusting the fences to protect them while they indulged in confiscated vodka and fine-tailored clothing. Sasha's plan was brilliantly simple. They would lure the officers into isolated workshops one by one using their own greed as bait. Invitations were sent for custom leather boots and gold watches, creating a lethal schedule where targets would disappear every 15 minutes precisely. If they could remove the German leadership in a single hour, the confused Ukrainian guards might hesitate during the final mass charge. The conspirators recruited executioners, sharpened hatchets in the carpentry shed, and waited for the perfect moment to strike at their captors. On October 13th, the 2 most dangerous officers unexpectedly left the camp, providing a sudden window of opportunity that Sasha immediately seized. The revolt was moved forward by 72 hours, forcing the rebels to prepare for total war in the silence of a single night. At 3:45, the telephone lines are severed, and the first Nazi walks into the tailor shop to meet his final fate. The plan begins now, as the silence of the tailor shop becomes the first grave for the masters of Sobibor. Across the camp, the invisible machinery of the revolt begins to turn, driven by the quiet desperation of the condemned. The Nazis believed their crimes were hidden, but the advancing front was a countdown they could no longer ignore or escape. Every workshop has become an ambush point, where the tools of labor have been transformed into instruments of liberation. The towers must fall if the mass escape is to succeed, for their machine guns are the ultimate arbiters of death. The forest is the only sanctuary, a green labyrinth that offers a slim chance of life for those who can reach it. 1 down, 10 to go, and the clock is ticking toward a moment that will change the course of history forever. The clock strikes 4:15 as the second target approaches the cobbler shop, unaware that his measurements have already been taken. Wolf expects a perfect fit for his stolen luxury, But the shadow moving behind him is not there to serve his vanity. A silent strike ends the officer's life before he can scream, his body caught by two pairs of waiting, desperate hands. At 4:30, the sorting warehouse becomes the next stage for the uprising, where greed serves as the ultimate lure. SS officer Rudolf Beckmann enters the warehouse, his eyes fixed on a golden prize that has cost 1,000 lives already. Yehuda Lerner strikes with the fury of the condemned, reclaiming justice with a blade forged in the camp's own secret fires. The body is hidden beneath the very garments stripped from the innocent, a macabre camouflage for the growing rebellion. In the carpentry shed, the silent war claims those who chose to serve the oppressors for a few extra crumbs. Even the garage offers no sanctuary, as the tools of labor are transformed into the instruments of a long-awaited vengeance. By late afternoon, the camp is a maze of hidden bodies, each workshop a secret tomb for the master race. They play a dangerous game of theater, posing the dead to fool the living for just a few more minutes. The tension in the yard is a physical weight, as 600 people wait for the signal that changes everything. Men who began the day with nothing but wooden spoons now hold the power to strike back at their tormentors. At 4:50, the plan hits a catastrophic snag as Karl Frenzel, the deadliest guard, fails to appear for death. Frenzel is a roaming wild card who can destroy the uprising with a single shout if he notices the silence. The clock runs out at 4:55 when Eric Bauer stumbles upon the evidence they tried so hard to hide. The deception is over as the siren's wail joins the whistle, announcing to the world that the prisoners have risen. Comrades, our time has come. The gates are ahead and the forest is our only hope. Forward to freedom or death. 600 people choose to fight, their collective roar drowning out the fear that has held them captive for months. Frenzel opens fire from the tower, stitching lines of static state across the yard as he tries to break the charge. They climb over the falling, clawing at the electrified wire with bare hands that are already torn to bloody ribbons. At the main gate, the struggle is measured in seconds as the prisoners fight to unlock the path to the world. The first runners pay the ultimate price, their lives sacrificed to reveal the hidden dangers of the lethal minefield. In a harrowing calculation, the survivors use the craters of the dead as stepping stones across the volatile soil. Freedom is a cold, rough bark under a bleeding hand as the first survivors finally break into the sanctuary of trees. 300 break out, leaving behind a factory of death that has been effectively destroyed from the inside out. They scatter into the darkness, becoming ghosts in the woods who carry the weight of 250,000 souls. An enraged Heinrich Himmler orders the camp liquidated immediately. Desperate to erase the evidence of the prisoners' triumph, demolition teams bulldoze the facility, paving over the mass graves with asphalt to hide the crimes from history. They planted trees to camouflage the terrain, believing that nature would eventually swallow the memory of their victims. But the survivors scattered across the world, their voices becoming a legacy that no amount of asphalt could ever silence. Sasha fought his way to Berlin, ensuring that the killers would face the justice they tried so hard to outrun. Leon survived the camp but fell to the shadows of hate just days before the final peace was won. The pine trees at Sobibor still stand today, whispering above the soil that holds 250,000 souls, a story finally told. The hunters of yesterday became the prey of tomorrow, casting off their blood-stained identities to vanish into the gray post-war ruins. Through the secret rat lines, many Sobibor executioners fled across the Atlantic seeking sanctuary in the vast unmapped reaches of South America. The survivors did not seek revenge in the shadows. Instead, they gathered evidence to ensure the law would finally speak. Karl Frenzel spent years as a humble stage technician, hiding in the literal spotlights of a world that had forgotten his crimes. In 1962, the masquerade ended with a sharp knock on the door, bringing the wild card of Sobibor back to face reality. Behind closed doors, the man who once decided who lived or died found himself powerless under the glare of the truth. The Sobibor trials in Hagen became a stage where the ghosts of the camp finally found their voices through the survivors. Thomas Blatt stood before his tormentors, holding the very timepiece that had measured the seconds of their desperate, successful uprising. The defense tried to claim the camp was merely a transit station, but the survivors' maps revealed a factory of industrial murder. Justice was slow and often incomplete, but the convictions ensured that the world could never again look away from the truth. Decades later, archaeologists began to peel back the layers of pine and soil, finding the physical evidence the Nazis tried to erase. They found the tiles of the neutralization rooms, proving that the factory of death was a physical, undeniable reality, not a myth. The 300 who escaped became the voices for the 250,000 who did not, their legacy etched in stone and memory. Sasha lived to see the fall of Berlin, but his true victory was the survival of the people he led out of the wire. Leon did not survive the peace, but his courage in the barracks ensured that the spark of resistance never went out. From the ashes of a Polish forest, a new diaspora was born, carrying the story of Sobibor to every corner of the world. The tools of murder were transformed into symbols of defiance, reminding future generations that even the unarmed can strike back. The fences that once held 600 souls are now nothing but iron and rust, reclaimed by the very earth they desecrated. The name that once meant certain death now stands as a monument to the human spirit's refusal to be broken by tyranny. The story of Sobibor is a testament to the fact that light can emerge from the deepest darkness if men choose to fight. But the spirit of escape was not confined to the east. In the heart of Germany, another impossible plan was taking shape. While Sobibor fought with hatchets, the men of Stalag Luft III fought with engineering, digging 3 tunnels they named Tom, Dick, and Harry. They weren't just digging, they were creating an entire alternate reality, forging passports and sewing civilian clothes from stolen blankets and scraps. 30 feet below the surface, they built a world of wood and tin, a subterranean highway designed to lead 76 men to freedom. They used a gymnastic horse to hide the tunnel entrance, a masterpiece of deception that happened in plain sight of the guards. The moment of truth arrived on a moonless night in March. As the first man lowered himself into the dark abyss, they emerged short of the tree line, exposed to the searchlights, forced to time their movements with the sweep of the beams. The escapees were now actors in a deadly play, using their forged papers in perfect German to board trains toward the border. For those who didn't take the train, it was a brutal trek through the frozen wilderness, hunted by thousands of German soldiers. Hitler was livid. The Great Escape had humiliated the Luftwaffe and forced the regime to divert thousands of troops to the hunt. Of the 76 who escaped, only 3 reached freedom. 50 were executed in cold blood on the direct orders of the Führer. Their sacrifice became a legend, a story of ingenuity and courage that proved no prison could hold the human will for long. The men of Stalag Luft III and Sobibor were different in many ways, but they shared a single unbreakable bond: the refusal to submit. Whether through a forest in Poland or a tunnel in Germany, the path to freedom is always paved with the courage of the few. The empty chairs of the 11 neutralized officers became a haunting testament to the collapse of the camp's once absolute and terrifying authority. Panicked by the breach, the remaining SS staff began destroying the paper trail of Action Reinhard, hoping to bury their atrocities in ash. For the 300 who escaped, the swamp became both a sanctuary and a trap, as German patrols and dogs scoured the undergrowth. In retaliation for the Great Escape, Hitler issued the Sagan Order, resulting in the cold-blooded execution of 50 recaptured Allied airmen. Sasha did not stop running until he found the partisans, transforming from a camp prisoner back into a lethal commander of the resistance. Many of the Sobibor guards slipped away into civilian life, assuming false identities to escape the coming storm of international war crimes trials. Ironically, upon his return to the Soviet Union, Sasha was treated with suspicion, undergoing grueling interrogations about his time in German captivity. Leon Feldhendler survived the horrors of Sobibor, only to be neutralized in his own home by anti-Semitic extremists just days after liberation. In 2020, the Niemann collection was discovered, providing unprecedented visual evidence of the officers' lives and the camp's deceptive, peaceful appearance. Decades after the Nazis bulldozed the site, archaeologists uncovered the foundations of the gas chambers, proving the survivors' testimonies were chillingly accurate. During the Hagen trials of the 1960s, the survivors finally confronted their tormentors, ensuring the world knew the names of the killers. The excavation revealed the Himmelfahrtstrasse, the narrow path where victims were driven toward the chambers, now a silent memorial to the lost. Sasha Pechersky's heroism was eventually recognized internationally, cementing his place as one of the greatest resistance leaders of the 20th century. While 11 Nazis were neutralized, the uprising was ultimately a fight for the 250,000 who could not escape. The revolt successfully dismantled the camp's operational capacity, forcing the SS to abandon Sobibor months ahead of their original schedule. The men of Stalag Luft III and Sobibor shared a common bond: the refusal to accept a fate dictated by their captors. In 2020, DNA technology finally allowed researchers to identify individual victims, returning names and faces to those the Nazis tried to erase. Buried deep in the soil, the secret caches of the prisoners remained, waiting for decades to tell their stories of life and resistance. Justice was a marathon, not a sprint, but the testimony of the Sobibor survivors ensured that the truth could never be buried. Until his death in 1990, Sasha Pechersky remained the voice of the revolt, reminding the world that even the unarmed can strike back. Today, the site of Sobibor is no longer a hidden factory of death, but a hallowed ground dedicated to the memory of defiance. The uprising was a crack in the monolith of the Holocaust, proving that the human spirit could survive even the most industrial evil. The 11 who died that day were the first of many to face the reckoning for their part in the camp's mechanical neutralization. They did not just escape a camp, they escaped the silence that the Nazis intended to be the final word on their lives. The prisoners' greatest legacy was their testimony, a weapon that continues to strike at the heart of those who would deny history. Where blood once soaked the sand and mines waited to destroy, life has returned, though the scars beneath the soil remain forever. Survival was a collective effort, requiring the quiet courage of ordinary people who risked everything to hide those who had escaped. Leon's dream of freedom was short-lived, but his partnership with Sasha remains one of the most significant alliances in the history of resistance. Every year, thousands of students visit the site to learn how a small group of prisoners outmaneuvered their well-armed and arrogant captors. The clock that once measured the intervals of death now marks the passage of a history that can never be erased or forgotten. The towers fell, the wire was cut, and the factory of death was silenced by the very people it was designed to destroy. Their story is a reminder that even in the face of absolute darkness, the human will to be free is the ultimate weapon. The prisoners of Sobibor and Stalag Luft III proved that no fence is high enough to contain the eternal spirit of human liberty.